I wanted to change things up this time around, and instead of writing part 4 of this series, I decided to make a video, which I haven't done in a while, but I want to do more consistently because in many ways a video is better than an article. So throughout the course of this series, we've gone over what Interstate CrossCheck is, some of the people behind it, and some of the damage that's been done. Like over 7 million registered voters being erroneously labeled as quote-unquote double voters in swing states across the country. A fact that cannot be ignored or played down. Well, now I'd like to talk about solutions to this undemocratic catastrophe. You see, restoring the Voting Rights Act is a start and would do a lot of good, like helping to prevent the mass closing of polling stations in states across the country. Over 860 polling stations were shut down after the 2013 decision prior to the 2016 election. The gutting of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 in 2013 by the right-wing Supreme Court led by Antonin Scalia basically opened the floodgates for the new Jim Crow to move into a new phase. Conservatives realized that the only way they were going to be able to maintain power was by torching the voting rights of non-white Americans. That's their only play now, and we can't be blinded by how our inability to vote is a major goal of the plutocratic white supremacists who have always dominated America. Which is why I've never been on that don't vote train. That's what they want us to do. And at this point, that's the only thing that's keeping them in political power due to the changing demographics of America. They now have to nullify voter registrations by the millions, and we can't let them. But restoring the Voting Rights Act is only a step in the right direction, you see. John Lewis introduced the Voting Rights Advancement Act in 2015, and of course that didn't get far. The bill would have corrected the main problems that came from the gutting of the Voting Rights Act in 2013, but it didn't go far enough in my opinion. We can't simply settle for bringing Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act back from the dead to bring states with a history of voter suppression under more scrutiny like they had been before, and thinking that's all the work that needs to be done. Any future voting rights legislation has to address other problematic aspects of voter suppression in America. Like what, you may ask? One provision I'd like to see added to future voting rights legislation is the banning of congressional gerrymandering. A radical solution, I know, but a necessary one. Right now in America, you think you choose your representatives, but in reality, it's the opposite. Your representatives really choose you, because the parties in power are allowed to rig the map in ways that allow them to maintain power, and this usually benefits conservatives more than it benefits progressives. For instance, my state, North Carolina, has become ground zero for illegal and unconstitutional gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is what allows Democrats to get millions more votes than Republicans, but still lose 30+ seats to the Republicans. Gerrymandering is what allows politicians in Congress, who are always unpopular, to never have to worry about losing their seats. At least they don't have to worry as much as someone who wasn't protected by this undemocratic system. Gerrymandering needs to go, and we won't be able to truly have the government we want with it in place. Another must-have provision is legislation that mandates a paper trail across all voting systems in every state nationwide. All you have to do is go to Ballotpedia and you can see nearly every state with large black populations have systems that leave behind no paper trail. Then you look at the Midwest and Western states and they all use paper ballots for the most part. Now we have to ask ourselves if we really think it's a coincidence that in many Republican-controlled states with large black and brown populations, there's no way to verify your vote. Of course not. It brings the integrity of our entire election system into question and opens the door to electoral corruption. You're basically begging corrupt cronies to rig elections, and don't put it past them that they won't. Cross-check is proof that they can, and they will. Even in states that Ballotpedia says have paper trails is subject to scrutiny, and would depend on the district and which type of machines were being used. It's not impossible to see a scenario where predominantly white districts would get machines that would provide a paper trail, while the districts that were predominantly black don't get that. I know when I voted in North Carolina, I didn't get any confirmation paper stating that I voted for who I voted for, and I live in a predominantly black city. But it doesn't end with securing voting machines with paper trails and banning congressional gerrymandering. We also must demand the outlawing of felony disenfranchisement. According to the Sentencing Project, over 6.1 Americans who would otherwise be eligible to vote are legally disenfranchised. This number has only increased over the decades as more and more people are incarcerated. Over 7.4% of black adults are disenfranchised versus 1.8% of non-blacks. Felony disenfranchisement may be the only reason why Florida is even still competitive for Republicans, given the fact that 31% of black Americans are disenfranchised in Florida alone. Virginia has a horrendous record too, with a black disenfranchisement rate of 22%. Both are considered swing states. Certain states would either go solid blue or would at least be competitively purple for Democrats were it not for felony disenfranchisement. How much do you want to bet that Alabama, with its 9 electoral votes, could go purple, if not blue, if felony disenfranchisement didn't prevent a whopping 7% of its total population from voting? Alabama is nearly 30% black. It's only a red state at this point purely because of disenfranchisement. In Alabama, 31% of eligible black adults are prevented from voting, similar to Florida. Even though Trump beat Clinton by over 588,000 votes in Alabama, without felony disenfranchisement, you're adding almost 400,000 black voters to the list. That alone would make Alabama competitive, and that's not including potential gains made if gerrymandering and voting ID laws were reined in. Now, long term, we need to look towards a constitutional amendment to make voting rights protections more ironclad. One of the main reasons why impediments to voting have gone into effect post-Civil War is because the 15th Amendment was written in a way that gave enough wiggle room to allow for disenfranchisement as long as it wasn't blatantly racist. It didn't say poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses weren't illegal, which is why blacks spent another 100 years up until the 1960s fighting those new forms of voter suppression. Hell, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 had to be passed purely just to reinforce the 15th Amendment, which had been ratified 100 years prior. The 15th Amendment doesn't protect against voter ID laws or schemes like CrossCheck. All forms of voter suppression need to be expressly forbidden, and those who violate this need to face the threat of serious jail time. You see, at the end of the day, penalties are what matters most. The gutting of the Voting Rights Act in 2013 should have opened everyone's eyes to the fact that even with legislation, our rights can still be infringed upon. So we can't just look at legislative remedies as solutions. States that are found to be participating in voter suppression tactics need to lose something. We need to set it up to where committing voter suppression forces the perps to put serious skin in the game and risk it all to maintain power. The cost for violating the rights of Americans need to come at a high price. This will serve as the greatest deterrent of all. Getting even the most basic voter protections passed in this current political climate is going to be damn hard. Much less some of the things I suggested in this video would bring an end to the Republican Party as we know it. Interstate CrossCheck wouldn't even exist if the solutions mentioned in this video went into effect. The restoration of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the banning of gerrymandering and felony disenfranchisement, and increasing penalties on states that suppress the vote, all of these things would basically require a new Voting Rights Act, which is what needs to be done. We're in an uphill battle, ladies and gentlemen, and we've taken a lot of political L's recently. The white lash against Barack Obama has been swift, and voting rights haven't been attacked this strongly for many decades. The right-wing conservative politicians of America are waging all-out war against non-white voters so that white people can maintain political power as their numbers shrink. Let's not pretend it's about anything else. They have think tanks like the Heritage Foundation pumping out propagandistic drivel, claiming that voter suppression is a myth and voter ID laws work and are needed. This coming from a group that speaks proudly of suspected white supremacists like Chris Kobach. It's nothing more than an attempt to legitimize what has already been in motion since 2013, and that is the return of quote-unquote Jim Crow voting. Cross-check and other acts of voter suppression are the new black codes, the new poll taxes and literacy tests. This is an assault on democracy, the likes of which ISIS could only dream of. If you like this video, make sure you hit the like button. You can also read my articles on my blog at blackandintellectual.com.